Today we'll explore the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, 2016, commonly known as IBC. This landmark legislation revolutionized how insolvency and bankruptcy are handled in India, aiming to streamline processes and protect the interests of all stakeholders. We'll break down the key rules, important judgments, and major amendments so you get a clear understanding of how the IBC works in practice. Let's start by understanding the scope and precedence of this act over other laws and then move into its structure and recent changes. IBC takes precedence over other acts like the DRT and SARFASI when it comes to insolvency-related matters. This means that if there's a conflict, the IBC will override these older laws, ensuring a unified approach to insolvency resolution. This clarity helps avoid confusion and ensures that all parties follow a single, streamlined process. The Act's supremacy is crucial for efficient resolution and for building confidence among creditors and debtors alike. It's important to note that Part III of the IBC, which deals with insolvency resolution and bankruptcy for individuals and partnership firms, is not yet enforced. This section is designed to eventually bring individuals and partnerships under the IBC's umbrella, but as of now, its provisions remain inactive. The phased implementation reflects the government's cautious approach, ensuring that the system is robust before expanding its scope. IBC classifies individuals into three categories for insolvency purposes: personal guarantors to corporate debtors, partnership and proprietorship firms, and other individuals. This classification allows the government to implement individual insolvency provisions in a phased and organized manner, starting with personal guarantors. This approach helps manage complexity and ensures that each group's unique needs are addressed. November 15, 2019, the central government notified that provisions relating to personal guarantors to corporate debtors would commence from December 1, 2019. This marked a significant step in bringing personal guarantors under the IBC's framework, ensuring that those who guarantee corporate loans are also accountable under the insolvency process. Alongside the notification, two key rules were introduced: the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Application to Adjudicating Authority for Insolvency Resolution Process for Personal Guarantors to Corporate Debtors, Rules, 2019, and the Bankruptcy Process Rules for the same. These rules lay out the process and forms for initiating insolvency and bankruptcy proceedings against personal guarantors, including how applications are made, withdrawn, and how creditors are notified. When a corporate debtor takes a loan, it may be guaranteed by another company or an individual. If the debtor defaults, the lender can pursue either the guarantor or the debtor. The IBC ensures that insolvency proceedings for both corporate and personal guarantors are handled together, streamlining the process and preventing conflicting outcomes. All insolvency applications related to corporate debtors and their guarantors must be filed before the National Company Law Tribunal (NCLT). If any related proceedings are pending in other courts, they are transferred to the NCLT. This centralizes decision-making and ensures consistency in insolvency resolutions. Regulations and rules regarding personal guarantors and related insolvency processes officially came into force on December 1, 2019. This date marks the beginning of a more comprehensive insolvency framework, covering not just companies but also those who guarantee their debts. IBC lays out strict penalties for misconduct during insolvency proceedings. These are mainly divided into two categories: severe offenses that can lead to imprisonment and fines, and lesser offenses that may involve shorter jail terms or just fines. The aim is to deter fraud and ensure transparency throughout the process. Officers of a corporate debtor who, within 12 months before or after insolvency proceedings, willfully conceal or fraudulently transfer property or provide false information, can face imprisonment of 3 to 5 years, fines ranging from 1 lakh to 1 crore rupees or both. These strict measures are designed to prevent manipulation of assets and ensure honest disclosures. For offenses like defrauding creditors through improper transactions or violating the moratorium or resolution plan, the punishment is 1 to 5 years in prison, a fine between 1 lakh and 1 crore rupees or both. These penalties ensure that all parties respect the process and act in good faith. In India, there are no prisons for debtors simply because they owe money. Imprisonment is only possible if a debtor commits fraud, such as using fake documents to obtain loans or transferring borrowed money under false pretenses. This distinction protects honest debtors while punishing fraudulent behavior. Schurner Trading Company vs. Juggalo Kamlapat Jute Mills, the Supreme Court clarified that the 14-day period for the adjudicating authority to admit or reject insolvency applications is directory, not mandatory. Similarly, the 7-day period for rectifying application defects is also directory. This ensures flexibility and avoids unnecessary dismissals due to procedural delays. Mobilox Innovations vs. Kurusa Software, the Supreme Court outlined the conditions for operational creditors to trigger the IBC. There must be a default, a demand notice, and no satisfactory reply or payment within 10 days. The court also clarified that a real dispute must exist for an application to be rejected, preventing frivolous claims from blocking genuine insolvency cases. Supreme Court, in Alchemist Asset Reconstruction vs. Hotel Gaudavan, held that arbitration proceedings cannot be started after a moratorium is imposed under the IBC. Any arbitration initiated after the moratorium is considered void. This ruling strengthens the moratorium's protective shield over the debtor's assets during insolvency. Nikhil Mehta and Sons vs. AMR Infrastructure, the NCLT ruled that real estate buyers under assured return plans are considered financial creditors. This means they can initiate insolvency proceedings if the builder defaults on payments or delivery, giving more power to homebuyers in such cases. Supreme Court in K.S. Rangasamy v. State Bank of India clarified that if a corporate debtor is willing to pay the total amount with interest, the financial creditor can settle the dispute. If the promoter's offer is better than the resolution plan, they can approach the appropriate forum to get the settlement recorded. This ruling encourages fair settlements. The case against Kamini Steel and Power, the NCLT Hyderabad approved a resolution plan with 66.67% creditor approval, but the NCLAT later struck it down for not meeting the mandatory 75% vote share required at the time. The threshold has since been reduced to 66%. This case highlights the evolving nature of voting requirements in the IBC. Brilliant Alloys v. S. Rajagopal, the Supreme Court dealt with withdrawal of insolvency proceedings after the invitation for expression of interest. The NCLT ruled that withdrawal applications must follow strict timelines and cannot be allowed after certain stages, ensuring procedural discipline in the insolvency process. NCLAT in Sandeep Kumar Gupta v. Stewarts and Lloyds ruled that the performance of a resolution professional RP is subject to the adjudicating authority's satisfaction. If not satisfied, the authority can replace the RP or appoint a new liquidator, ensuring accountability in the process. Shah Bros Ispat v. P. Mohanraj, the NCLAT clarified that criminal proceedings under Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act are not covered by the IBC's moratorium. This means criminal cases for dishonored checks can proceed even during insolvency, separating civil and criminal liabilities. Supreme Court in Transmission Corporation v. Equipment Conductors clarified that the adjudicating authority must determine if there is an operational debt, if it is due and unpaid, and if there is a real dispute. This ensures that only genuine cases proceed under the IBC, preventing misuse of the process. In State Bank of India v. V. Ramakrishnan, the Supreme Court held that the moratorium under Section 14 of the IBC applies only to corporate debtors, not to personal guarantors. This means creditors can still proceed against personal guarantors even during the moratorium period. NCLAT in Karan Goel v. Pashupati Jewelers ruled that the mere existence of a pending suit is not a valid reason to reject an application under Section 7 of the IBC. Pre-existing disputes are relevant under Section 9, but not under Section 7, which deals with financial creditors. In the case of Vineet Khosla v. Edelweiss Asset Reconstruction, the NCLAT clarified that at the admission stage under Section 7, the adjudicating authority is not required to consider whether a resolution is possible or if the company can remain a going concern. The focus is solely on the existence of debt and default. Supreme Court in ArcelorMittal India v. Satish Kumar Gupta held that the stage of ineligibility for resolution applicants attaches when the resolution plan is submitted. The court also ruled that the 270-day time limit for completing the insolvency process is mandatory and cannot be extended. NCLT Hyderabad and Power Finance Corporation v. Mahendra Kondawal clarified the process for replacing an interim resolution professional IRP. The Committee of Creditors COSI can replace the IRP with a 66% majority, written consent from the new professional, and application to the adjudicating authority. Final appointment is confirmed by the IBBI. The IBC has been amended several times to address challenges and streamline the Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process, CIRP. The 2020 Amendment Act, effective from December 28, 2019, brought significant changes to improve efficiency and clarity in the insolvency process. Due to the financial distress caused by COVID-19, the government raised the minimum default threshold for initiating insolvency proceedings from 1 lakh to 1 crore rupees. This move aims to protect smaller businesses from insolvency actions during tough economic times. The insolvency commencement date is now defined as the date when the application for initiating CIRP is admitted. This provides clarity and ensures that all subsequent actions are based on a clear starting point. The interim resolution professional IRP must now be appointed on the date the insolvency application is admitted. The IRP continues to manage the corporate debtor's affairs until a resolution plan is approved or liquidation is ordered, ensuring continuity and stability. A minimum threshold has been introduced for financial creditors under Section 21(6)(a) and for real estate allottees. This means that a certain number of creditors must come together to initiate insolvency, preventing frivolous or isolated claims from triggering the process. During the moratorium period, licenses, permits, quotas, and similar rights cannot be terminated unless the corporate debtor defaults on necessary payments. This ensures that the debtor can continue operations and work towards resolution without losing critical business rights. The amendment provides protection from prosecution for new management or officials for offenses committed before the commencement of the insolvency process. This encourages fresh investment and ensures that new owners are not penalized for past misdeeds. Properties of the corporate debtor are now protected from attachment, seizure, or retention for offenses committed before the insolvency process began. This ensures that assets remain available for resolution or liquidation, benefiting all creditors. Controversial change is the introduction of a minimum threshold for real estate alletees to initiate insolvency. Now, an alletee must gather at least 99 other buyers or 10% of total buyers to file a case. Critics argue this makes it harder for individual homebuyers to seek redressal under the IBC. The validity of the new threshold for real estate alletees has been challenged in the Supreme Court. The court has granted a status quo order on pending matters, meaning the final outcome is still awaited. This highlights the ongoing debate over balancing creditor rights and consumer protection. 2020 Amendment Act made changes to several sections of the IBC, including sections 5, 7, 11, 14, 16, 21, 23, 29A, 32A, 227, 239, and 240. These amendments address practical difficulties and aim to make the insolvency process more efficient and transparent. The amendments have streamlined the corporate insolvency resolution process by clarifying procedures, reducing bottlenecks, and ensuring that all stakeholders have a clear path to resolution. This makes the process faster and more predictable for everyone involved. Despite improvements, some amendments have been criticized, especially the new thresholds for real estate alletees. Critics argue that these changes may disadvantage individual investors and dilute the welfare intent of the original legislation. The debate continues as stakeholders await further judicial review. For those interested in the full history of amendments to the IBC, you can visit the official Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India (IBBI) website. There you'll find a comprehensive list of all legal frameworks, notifications, and updates related to the code. The IBC continues to evolve, with courts and lawmakers refining its provisions to address new challenges. Its dynamic nature means that stakeholders must stay updated on the latest changes and interpretations to navigate insolvency proceedings effectively. Sum up, the IBC is a comprehensive and evolving framework for insolvency and bankruptcy in India. It takes precedence over older laws, covers both companies and personal guarantors, and has strict penalties for misconduct. Recent amendments have streamlined processes but also sparked debate, especially regarding real estate alletees. Staying informed is crucial for all stakeholders. Thank you for joining this comprehensive overview of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, 2016. As the law continues to develop, it remains essential for businesses, creditors, and individuals to understand their rights and responsibilities under the IBC. Stay tuned for further updates as the legal landscape evolves.